Oh shoot.
This is the Our
Oh,
Zen Post of the Week podcast, where we discuss a Zen Reddit post of practical or academic or otherwise interest. There are about 1,000 years of Zen historical records created in China by Zen masters and Zen students and passersby. Nerds, Zen nerds, also created records. Our guest will introduce themselves and tell us why they picked this post.
welcome you, welcome everyone to my episode. Um, Kids just started crying. We'll go with it. And also on my wife's spec book, don't know how to push buttons on this. Here's the link I need. You know what's cool is that her messages pop up here, so I finally get to find out what that secret lady is doing all the time. Back Reddit. Here we go. Navigating. My name is Brian. You can find me as TF Narcon9 on Reddit. Occasional poster. Occasional commenter, rather. Zoom is here. And the post is here. All right. You know, after I read these and a few days go by, I'm not really interested in them anymore. Have you considered that?
um, so you should pick something more recent.
Okay, let's do something more recent, but maybe and I think there I try to have a blend of interesting and personally controversial. Um, let's just pick that new trend. Let's change it. We'll pick that new translation post.
Okay.
Now I already made my comment on it, so I'm seconds away from caring about it at all.
Wow, that's fast.
Well, it enters the whatever meta is going on, and then that culminates into something. I think I got an OP and me will get off, but these things all add to it. I want to talk about precepts, but no one's made a precept post in a minute or a specific one.
I have to say, I still do not understand the attraction. Like, I was like it was like a year and a half ago, and I'm like, yeah, okay, so precepts, yeah, whatever. And everyone's like, oh, and I'm still like, what? Why
It
are we
was very,
even talking about this? I don't understand. Did
it
you
was
want to?
very interesting, and
Did you
it
want to
very,
steal things? I just don't. I'm like, what? Okay, all right,
as
sorry.
far as I could see, it very weirdly, and I guess it all started from you can't drink, in my mind, and not that that led to other things, but it sort of made people anger into honesty about other things. But yeah, the you can't drink thing seemed to really be the hinge point there. But it makes sense. We were lied to for a long time that drinking was healthy for you, or a glass of wine a day, kind of a thing, they were all nonsense. It was all
Well,
not,
it's
it was
interesting
all
because
fake.
it's not completely fake, right? I mean, the problem is that that a glass of wine a day shrinks your brain. Now, it might also reduce some chance of, for example, heart attack if you don't exercise and have a crappy diet.
Well, grape
But
juice.
it's still shrinking your brain.
That's just
Right. I mean,
it's just
yes,
the fruit of it.
that's
It's just
right. It is just the fruit of it. Yes.
anyway.
Anyway,
So yeah, well,
I didn't. Well, yeah, I mean, I think it's really interesting that I absolutely failed to predict how important alcohol was to people. I just completely failed to predict that. Like, so important that I couldn't even say, well, it's just not related to this conversation without just such an overwhelming amount of fury. I just,
yeah, it's very pushed culturally as something to do that you should take as medicine occasionally. Um, and that one thing I've been thinking about is it's also like it's very I don't know, not probably the most appropriate word, but falsifiable. Like the Zen masters actually kind of say an enlightened person does this, and an enlightened person does that, and if you're dumb, you do this, etc. Like they say those things, not necessarily prescriptive, but often descriptive. But you know, they tell you to do things all the time. So what is it about the precepts that are crazy? Well, we can look at them and see that you are not following them. Where the other things are like, we have to know maybe your intent, or you can fool around with it and get around, like, I don't show this sort of conduct that a Zen master would, but you can't really tell me that exactly. But when someone sees that you're drinking, that's it, game over.
Well, yeah, I mean, it's also further complicated by the fact that it's not even the entry level requirement of not drinking, since that's all it is, just an entry level requirement. It's the fact that they seem to want to say that they're still great Zen students even when they're drunk. I mean, they may not be able to drive a car, but they think that they have wisdom and insight anyway, right? And that's an odd thing. Like, you can't operate a vehicle, and you chose to get into this state because you feel better. But why would that be a recommendation for your ability to have a public interview, right? I mean, like, was that what's next, right? You have Dharma interviews while drunkenly trying to drive home. I mean,
yeah, I mean, and Zen masters tell you, like, this is going to be a hard thing in a lot of ways. And when I think about the hard things I've done in life, they were impossible to do if I was drunk. When I knew I was going to have my child, 5-6 years ago, I was like, okay, my wife is pregnant. I guess I can't drink anymore. It was as simple as that. It was like, it wasn't even like, oh, this really spurs me to not want to do it. It's like, well, I can't do that and this at the same time, so I have to choose. It was simple as that. Not to say it's that easy for everyone, but yeah, I mean, you can't do hard things and be intoxicated, and maybe you can some things, but not in my life. I couldn't. The things that were truly hard,
well,
business,
I think
family.
it's pretty big deal. It's a pretty big deal to have something as a recreation versus to have something as a crutch that you depend on, right? And I think it's easy to give up something that's a recreation, but it's really hard and maybe even impossible to give up a crutch. And the difference between people who drink recreationally and people who drink because they need the crutch is a huge gulf that a lot of people think is this little gray line, right? But it's just a massive it's a crevasse.
That's fair.
But again, I mean, I didn't have any idea this was gonna. I mean, I wanted to talk about the Zen precepts, right, as some themes that we see in the 1,000 years that help people with coming to terms with these teachings. That was what I wanted to talk about. I did not have any interest. I mean, like, of course you're not going to steal and lie. I mean, yeah, I mean, but why would we even debate that? I don't even understand.
It's interesting and makes sense and is disappointing, but it's also exciting. So I think it's all right. We'll make it through.
Well, I mean, the thing is that I mean, I don't think that we'll make it through. I mean, that's like, I mean, the community has been reshaped by this controversy, and I'm not even sure that it was a relevant controversy to begin with, right? And I think the whole question of racism in Japanese scholarship is a much more relevant thing, and it's still not even relevant. So, I mean, I don't know. The text that you were referring to, by the way, I did not even see the post until just now, and I don't know who it is. I don't know where it comes from.
It's sketchy. So, but now you veered me into it, so I'm gonna blame you 100%.
I feared you.
But it
my
is
job.
It's like On the bottom, it says this guy was named in the record of Lindsay, which I didn't have any time to check. Bowsy, 418, 514, pretty old. Yeah, so it's so for the listeners, just so you know, like this guy could have just made this up. Like he could have just wrote this right now. We haven't done any fact checking on this post. Let me read it.
All right.
There's not much to it. It is literally just the translation, which this user Mojo Power, who hasn't posted in over a year, I've checked, did himself. And at the bottom, he says, this text written by Bowsy. How do you say that?
Baozi.
Baozi.
Yeah. Baozi. Baozi.
One of the biggest tears in my life, or holes, is my inability, but the necessity of my work and jobs to pronounce names correctly in the worst circumstances. So I'm surrounded by a lot of people who have differently cultured names than me, and it's a nightmare. Referred by Lindsay as a man of old, which he says is in the record of Lindsay, page 172, which is a good start. Something we could check.
Well, the bad news is that Terabess has two different Bauges. So
that's the other thing I was going to mention. Was like, there's also really no way to know that we have the one being quote unquote referred to, etc. I think the words are pretty uncontroversial of themselves, but again, that's sort of irrelevant if we find that it's not someone who's part of the tradition, at least by being named by Lindsay. 1418 to 514. So let's read these, and we can read them, and then we can talk about how they're not, maybe it's not part of the tradition. Maybe we can do some research. But I thought they were cool sentences, and content-wise could definitely be argued to be relevant to Zen. Not that content is much of a decider. We know that the action often overrides the content in the records, but doesn't negate it. So we can go. Okay, I think there's 6 statements. I wonder how many people are still listening. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. I always forget that these are 40 minutes. I'm very, very relaxed. When we used to do the podcast, they would be like 3 hours. So we would still be talking about our day by now. So
yep. There's always somebody running out of time, always, which I think that's nice. There's a little bit of pressure there. Even if you want to get to it, you better get to it. Right.
All right. Yeah, we're always getting to something, so it's no big deal. Here's statement 1, and I'll say it like that, even though it's not in the post. Statement 1. The great path is not attained through cultivation. Any talk of cultivation is a provisional setup for dullards. Statement 2. When you look back on your cultivation after having ascertained the truth, you will comprehend that all your efforts had been in vain. If you are not enlightened to the great and perfect truth yet, it's essential necessity to grasp behavior perception. Cognition conceptualization, he has some quotes there. One must not carry others' explanations, for when you return to inner shine and source, nothing of such kind can be found there. Whoever understands what is being said here, let him be taught to look within himself. When will we see his past mistakes? Well, when he will see his past mistakes, the sores of the 5 desires will be eliminated. Liberated, he is carefree and at ease, selling his merriment for cheap. Whoever is a willing buyer, let him be freed from his worries, just like I am. So The interest and the controversy is that if this is a legitimate text, hasn't necessarily come from the comments yet because it's a brand new post, but very clearly the words, like in kind of plain English as they are translated, a cultivation is not the way to go. And once you are enlightened, you will realize you were dumb for even believing that and trying all that stuff, etc. Obviously, while it's not actually controversial, does rile people up. Do you feel comfortable talking about this text, or what are your feelings around that?
Well, I think the first problem is always like, what does the author mean? In the context of the author's other writing, public speech, interviews, etc., etc. So this is a fragment, and when he says past mistakes, we don't know what he thinks a mistake is. When he says the warty sores of the 5 desires will be eliminated, that sounds like he's left the building. And if he left,
it was so relevant, I left that word out.
Yeah, if he left the building down there, then he's not in the building anywhere. So, that's the thing. So that's the first problem, right? The second problem is, you pointed out authentication. Like it seems like we were deliberately given too little information to authenticate it.
I do think that too, and we've got a poster here. But this is all interesting stuff, so fine, let's talk about it. We've got a poster here who hasn't posted for a year, and when you go back, doesn't necessarily post things which seem to always be 100% on topic. There's definitely some sliding there, and maybe that was a glance, so maybe I'm wrong, user. If that's not true, then I apologize. And then we have this, which is like suspiciously on the nose, for a user who usually is, not that, and obviously without any other comments or stuff. Let me ask you a question so that we can all get smarter. How much, maybe there's a why in there too, how much context do you like to have when building an idea around what the words of the Zen master mean? Because go ahead and answer that question, I guess.
I don't understand the question.
Okay, so you said we don't know what any of this stuff means because we don't know what he means by, maybe we don't even know what he means by cultivation. He could be talking about a specific practice. We don't know what he means.
Well,
right?
I mean, I think that Japanese Buddhists have really muddied the water when it comes to the question of lineage, right? And I think it's very clear. We got all these clues, and in the Chinese record, right? What do they teach where you come from? Like, that's the opening. That's the way we start a conversation, is you tell me where you come from, who's there, and what they have said to you. And that's a magical amount of context right there. That is a huge amount of context. When you say Linji was at Huang Bo's place, you're like, oh, okay. Like, we know where Huang Bo's place was, and we know where he was before he got there. We know where his teacher was before his teacher got. I mean, there's a huge amount of context, right? So when Nanquin says stuff, we can go back and look at what Mazu said, and we can understand what Nanquin's saying, because they're related, right? So the first thing is, I want to know what they teach where you come from. And after that, I'd like to hear you be interviewed about some of the things that you've said that might be a little controversial, right? There's a great amount. The record is really wonderful in this respect, because apparently for 1,000 years, they just wanted to talk about the controversial stuff, like the boring stuff. Nobody recorded it. Nobody cares. No Zen master was like, yeah, let's talk about the boring stuff. So for example, in the record of Don Chen, we have, he's the start of the Soto Zen lineage. We have all these bombshells. Like, I mean, there's all these all these bombshells, and people ask him about them. Like, dude, did you really say that? And he's like, yeah, I did. And what's more? And so we get a sense of who he was because we know where he came from, what they taught him when he was there, and we have some idea of the controversial things he said and what he meant by them. And I think that's the full package. And ideally, we would get that from multiple sources, and then we would get Zen masters commenting on all that stuff. That's the ideal for me. So I found the guy on, he's on Terabes. Terabes says he appears in Blue Cliff Record 1 and 67. So I'm looking into that now. Also, I'm wondering if this is the, I think Wikipedia has the record that this comes from supposedly. So I'm adding that to my note. It's nothing I've ever heard of. And it's discovered in 2009. So it's a very recent discovery with little about it. And the Blue Cliff record reference is under PAO, maybe the other romanization of his name. But not according to the copy of the Blue Cliff record I have. So that's a little bit confusing. I'm suspicious of the source, and I can have my suspicions allayed by some interview or something, but again, we don't have anything. And I think that I don't care one way or the other if we talk about it as a community, but the habit by Japanese Buddhists is find a text that isn't central to any of the conversation in the 1,000 years, say that this text is representational of the 1,000 years, throw out the 1,000 years, and then keep talking about that text. But it's not representational, and it's not part of the conversations that happened in the 1,000 years. Like, they're not talking about it. So if they don't talk about it and it's not representational, then why is it the representative to the neglect of everything else? I mean, I don't understand it. Like, so the parallel here is, so you say this poster doesn't contribute content regularly from the 1,000 years. Well, we've already fallen into that pattern of, okay, well, here's something that's not in the 1,000 years. I haven't talked about the 1,000 years, but let's talk about this instead. I mean, it's a game I know well. So that's my second suspicion. Is that the third suspicion? The other one is Blue Cliff Record 67. I have not found any reference to anybody named Bao or Pao in the first Blue Cliff record case. And the Blue Cliff record is so long. I mean, I'm like, I would never think I had not missed something. I'm gonna miss something. I mean, it's just long. And that's even like volume 1, right? Because Sounding Strike is volume 2. Oh, wait. Whoa, here it is. All right.
Ooh,
Okay, here it is. I think this is it. I think, yes, I think Emperor Wu later questioned Master Che. Che said, "Does your majesty know who this man is?" The emperor said, "I don't know. Tell me, who is it?" And Che says, it is Mahasattva. It's that funny word that I can't produce. He's holy, man. You missed him. So that's the reference from Blue Cliff Record 1. He's that guy. He was in the room with Bodhidharma and the emperor on the day.
Okay. And that's according to, you said Wikipedia? as far as
Don't say it like that. Don't don't do me like that. No, Terabest says here's here's the alternate pronunciations of his name. So then I went to Blue Cliff Record and found what looks to be the other pronunciation of his name, and that's how we got there. That's just him, the historical figure. I don't know about linking this record to him, and I don't know why anyone would think that this record was linked to Zen, since it could have been written before Bodhidharma even showed up in China. So I don't get it.
Yeah, so we'll see what he has to say as this new post goes on. Has he said anything? It could be one of those don't say anything posts.
And then of course, right. I mean, this is a famous thing. Yuan Wu was going to go on to say, we know Chid died in 514, so it wasn't he wasn't around. He wasn't around for this conversation that we're reporting that he was around for. I can't help you with that. Moving on. So that's interesting. Right.
Yeah. So, and
Yuan was saying he wasn't there. I mean, that's pretty big.
That's very funny. The commenter is also squirming a little bit in the comments about where he got his sources. He says Google them.
Oh, right. I love it when they do that. Right. Just tell me that you're lying to me. I mean, what?
Clearly something is being hidden. All right.
Like, why? Just tell me that you're lying to me.
Okay.
Yeah, okay. So both of the references are to that Bodhidharma interview. And that would be the only. So this is only.
As brought up by the Blue Cliff Record only, right?
Sorry, say that again.
Does his character only appear in the Blue Cliff Record?
According to Terabest, yes. His name is only used in that account of the interview in the Blue Cliff Record.
Yeah. It's not looking good here.
So I guess what's the so aside from that, okay, so I think we can agree that text is not the supposed author is not in the Zen lineage. Okay, so what's the next problem? Well, the next problem is, well, people might say, if he really wrote this before Bodhidharma arrived, doesn't it tell us that there was already Zen in China?
Right, which is a more strict and smart comment than its adjacent one, which is, who cares who they were? It's the words that matter. Which is what you would get as an argument for Dogen or someone.
Well, this is a really, I mean, we spend a lot of time talking about academic stuff, just generally. But there are some interesting questions if you are an academic. And so one of the ones is if the how much of was coming from India to China, starting when, right? Did texts come over as early as, say, 200 BCE? Did texts come over by 200 CE? 400 CE? I mean, we have a huge amount of translation that happens in 450, I guess, right? But there was still stuff that was coming over the border before that. So where's the influence? How can we trace the influence of India on China before 500. Oh, before 400, right? And this text is right on the cusp of that. So how do we know what influenced it? I mean, you know, I don't know how do we even begin to tell, especially when we're not even being told where they got this text.
Do you hear the argument? And maybe I misunderstood the tone of your comment, but you hear the claim a lot that Chan was there or Zen was there before Bodhidharma?
The biggest dispute in this category, I think, is people saying that who's the big bird guy? Chuangzi. Yeah. People say Chuangzi sounds like Zen. Chuangzi is super old, so Zen must be a product of stuff coming from India and mixing with Chuangzi. And then they say, well, Chuangzi must be Taoist, so there's the influence there. And I'm like, well, I mean, he must be Taoist. I mean, he's kind of a weirdo, first of all. And second of all, we don't know whether he was a weirdo influenced by stuff that was coming from India at the time when he was around. We don't know what that timeline looks like. So it's just really not clear. And the problem is that people want to make it seem clear in order to support an argument that they don't have any other evidence for.
Yeah, I've heard that plenty. In fact, literally just had a long conversation with a friend who is into Mr. Chongyi and simply set me off just because he said, hey, this sounds zen-y. And I was like, well, actually, so that was fun. But yeah, that is very common. And so people are trying to take the mushiness of the whole thing and make very solid claims, which are one, based in mushiness, and two, don't seem to be bared out when you look at the content of the densest pieces of information we do have, which is the big books and the things that sprout from them.
So the Wikipedia page on my best guess for where the guy got this is called Moni Guan Fo, or Mani Buddha of Light. And it says it is a Xiaopu Manchian manuscript.
But what does that mean?
Well, that takes you to another Wikipedia page. These are manuscripts found in October 2008. And they've been popping up all over China. Basically, they're like, oh, I had a copy of that. Here's the interesting thing. These texts were used as ritual texts during religious ceremonies. Like they don't really care what they say, right? They keep them in a pagoda. So it's a very weird thing. I mean, I don't know.
And that's true, but you could say that modern religions use Zen texts as ritual too and don't care what they say.
I don't know, but I mean, they seem to care, and that's why they don't want to translate. Here's the funny part. In comparison with older forms of Manichaeism and other previously known forms of Chinese Manichaeism, the Xiaopu Manichaean texts strongly emphasize the worship of Jesus. So there you go. That's an interesting bit. So if it turns out that that's what's going on, then when you jump back, and this is what we were talking about earlier with regard to context, he says the warty sores of the 5 desires will be eliminated. And in Christian terms, that has very different meaning than it might have if a Zen master said it, right? Because Christians are supposed to be without desire. That's they're trying to transform themselves into, pure desireless beings. Zen masters, I don't think they roll that way. So right there we have wildly different interpretations of those words just based on the context of where they came from.
Yes, that's very good and quick work. Wonderful.
Well, the thing is, I well, I mean, it would be nice if he had just given us this work ahead of time, but then maybe he was afraid we wouldn't want to talk about it. I think it's interesting to talk about because, among other things, it's this old problem of two sentences can sound like pretty much anything. And that's how perennialists function, right? They take two sentences from that book and two sentences from this book, and they say, well,
one of the worst books I ever read was the Huxley book. And it's literally just word association. It's complete nonsense. I mean, it's convincing and if you're convinced by that, it's well done in a horrible way. Yeah.
Well, I don't remember what I was doing. I was waiting on a curb one day, and there was a guy sitting on the stairs of the building that the curb was going around, and he ended up giving me a lecture on numerology in the Bible.
Very did, yeah.
And that was really cool. I'm like, wow.
He also used to be the mayor, I'm pretty sure.
You've found the use. You've found a lot of examples of the number 81 in the Bible. That's a lot of 81s or multiples of 81 or things that multiply together to get 81 or things that add up to 8 and 1. There wasn't any, he was just looking for numbers that told him what he wanted to hear. And he didn't have he couldn't reflect on that at all, right? There was no iota of, if he was wrong, it was that he interpreted the numbers incorrectly and he just needed to reinterpret them.
Yeah, well, social media has taught us that there are large groups of people that think like that. People who come up with, conspiracy theories think like that. And then the people who believe them, I think like that too, where it's just sort of things that are similar they're similar because they mean the thing that you want them to mean. Here's something. It's a change of topic.
You have 1 minute.
Okay. I was thinking now, there's somewhere in your family, there's some sort of child psychologies going on or something. I don't know. You don't have to give me any information. Maybe it's a good
Yeah,
question.
there's a crap ton of them. Yeah.
Okay. I was thinking that maybe metacognition was dumb for children. And it maybe leads you directly to this issue of poor thinking.
Well, that's what timeouts are for, right? You're screaming at everybody. Just go over there and sit down for a second and calm down and think about what you've been doing, right? That's metacognition, right? You're stepping back from the situation to assess it in a more objective perspective. I don't think there's anything wrong with that. I think it's productive to examine your own behavior.
So when I say metacognition, I mean when you're taking it the meta step further and you're sort of as opposed to just generally thinking about the concept, you're specifically thinking about why did I do X? Why do I feel X way? Something like